Years ago, it was 1970, I had gone to Normandy to go to the source, La Trappe, where there had been the Great Reform. And on the first full Sunday I had there, I went to confession to the novice master, and he said, use this prayer. He gave me two. One was the prayer of, by now, I think he's Saint, isn't he, Charles de Foucault? The prayer of confidence. It's a complete self-abandonment to God, which quietly before an icon in the Bishop Chapel I said with great devotion, and I saw its depth. It meant that one was handing over one's will and one's being, just over to you, Lord, whatever you want. And the other was this prayer that we have just heard, and which has come down the centuries and is still much used by people in prayer. Speak, Lord, your servant is listening. The old translation, thy servant heareth. Now we can hear things but sometimes not listen, as indeed Simon and Garfunkel pointed out in The Sound of Silence. They're two separate concepts. How many words pass over our head and actually through our heart and are not picked up? And that is the problem with our God. We noticed that this prayer was given by an elder, Eli, to a little boy. This little boy was a miraculous boy. He shouldn't have been there, and the mother had been given the gift of fertility as a result of her intense prayer, but she gave the child back to his king and owner, and therefore he was in the temple, and it's quite quaint. There is the lamp burning there, it's deep in the night, and the little child hears objectively a voice and goes to his point of reference. And it's great to have a point of reference, a good spiritual father who can actually be the interpreter. But of course he didn't pick up initially what was going on, and then he saw, oh, it's not me, it must be him. And it worked. And the Lord came and spoke to Samuel. By the way, the very name Samuel has the notion of hearing in it. It's in the prayer, Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel. The Lord had heard the prayer of his barren mother. Now it was for him to hear the Lord himself. Now, when one is a child, one has one's whole life and indeed one's whole future eternity in front. And it's extremely important, therefore, that that child be put in a situation rather similar to this Samuel miracle child, where the child is exposed to the presence. That's why the church to this day hesitates a lot about having women or girls to be at the altar, because that will push out the boys. It'll be a sissy thing. Well, that's for a girl to do. Whereas 2 millennia of history have shown that that's where the Lord calls. Because you place a pure child next to the real presence, and then it's over to you, Lord. He has ways and means of tugging at the heartstrings of a child. In Italian, an altar server is called chierichetto. It means a little cleric. And it's beautiful to have little pure souls close to the King of Purity before other stuff has come in. It's also beautiful to have a child receive the Lord of Purity before other things come in. And under the influence of our own Mary of Holy God, St. Pius X picked that one up and acted upon it. By the age of puberty, other things start to distract a child. Those years are precious. There's an old Jesuit saying, give me a child until he's 7 years old, and I've got him forever. The first message given to a child is the one that tends to have a long-lasting effect. So let that first message be the right one. Don't hand it over to some machine that will babysit for you, and you've lost your child. But there's more, because the psalm picks it up as well. It's a psalm of listening and of handing over the will. The Hebrew is actually, as always, more concrete than our translation. The hint is there of digging out a ear, the inner ear. And I remember actually at La Trappe, that formation, being given that instruction, that real philosophy, that complete exercise of digging, what it is to live inside and sharpen the inner ear. It's all to do with reception. Now that applies to us on two levels. I remember how I noticed that the ear of the soul, when it's sharpened to God, tends also to be sharpened to others, because it's the same principle and faculty and dynamic. It's in input mode. And I came across in France a book which was just based on one verse. It was a holy nun, a Dominican nun, Joan of Arc, Jeanne d'Arc, who had written a book on one verse of scripture, and the key word was listening. It was the prayer of the young King Solomon. Give me a heart. Now we would translate that understands, a discerning heart. Again, it's just a way of translating the crude, concrete Hebrew. Give me a listening heart, a hearing heart. And she gave a whole teaching on what that meant and what we don't do. With regard to God, if we are in a place where He's present, if our mind and heart and even body is free and uncluttered, He's very much able to get through. This quiet celebration, still before dawn, is a place where every word can be heard. Every soul here is in a state of listening and attentiveness and grace, so it's a favourable terrain. The children too are still, and they pick it up, as do actually even some of the animals. We had a case here just this week when little Robin was looking especially at the consecrations, very still at the host. He sometimes goes around during the whole celebration, but we noticed that actually for the consecration he was like this. Now that means that they're picking up things. The animals somehow are not too much contaminated by the loss of our original innocence. There's something still clean there. So too a child. And we mustn't underestimate a child. If a dog can understand about 500 words, they say, in higher species, what is a child who has an angelic soul uncontaminated, especially when baptized? This then is what we have to do, and we hand that over to a machine that does it for us. Woe betide lazy parents. It comes back, quality time with the child. They have the child then attached by something far greater. With regard to this psalm, which is always chosen, as you know, in echo of the first reading, I would propose its principle to you. You compare a telephone with a radio set. I remember when I was in France thinking of this, my brother was working a lot with the BBC and things in those days, and should there ever be a situation where he would come on the radio, there would be a contact of soul. But it would only be in one direction, because on a radio, an old wireless, there is only output. If, on the other hand, for some reason I would have to talk to my brother, it would be by telephone. And on a telephone, there are two ends. There is input and output, but there is input. Now, you look around, and many human beings only operate in output mode. Even when you're talking to them, they're not really listening, they're preparing their answer. And it can be our case as well, if we're honest. You look at your next conversation, what are you doing? You're already, while the person is talking, thinking about the answer to this point. And it's a recipe for dysfunctional communication, two monologues. Why? One is answering only the preamble, the first point, which is only put there so as to get to the end, and we don't hear the end. We're handling the first point, which isn't the point. You look around. Is it not true? But it applies also to God. There are many of our prayer sessions which are actually in output mode. You watch people in adoration. What do you hear quite often? The Lord is not really doing the talking. Now, it doesn't need an awful lot to encourage the Lord to talk. All he's waiting for is space. And it's rather the same as with each other. One feels another human presence as one feels another divine presence far more, and one has learned to be completely still.